A flight attendant kicks an elderly black woman, and 7 minutes later, she owns the airline. This jaw-dropping story reveals a shocking encounter that unfolds during a routine flight, quickly spiraling into an intense confrontation between the flight attendant and the elderly woman. What started as a typical trip soon turned into a situation no one could have predicted, leaving everyone on the plane completely stunned by the unforeseen outcome. The sun streamed through the windows of the busy airport terminal as Mrs. Clara Turner, a graceful woman in her late 70s, stood quietly in line waiting for her flight. It was a journey she'd been eagerly anticipating for months. Dressed in a simple yet elegant navy blue dress, a black cardigan, and her beloved pearl necklace, she carried herself with the calm confidence that comes from a life well lived. Her soft gray curls were neatly tucked under a small hat, and in her hands, she gently gripped a leather handbag, an heirloom gift from her late husband. This trip was especially meaningful. It was her first time flying in years, and it would be the first time she'd visit her great-grandchildren. While Mrs. Clara was eager to reunite with family, she couldn't help but feel a mix of nervousness and excitement. Flying wasn't something she often did, and this would be her first time on a luxury airline, adding a layer of novelty to the experience. Her son, who had insisted on handling the ticket arrangements, was determined to ensure her trip was as smooth as possible. "Mom, you deserve the best," he had told her. Though Clara was initially reluctant to accept his offer, she eventually gave in, appreciating the opportunity to travel without the stress of long drives or crowded bus rides. As she entered the boarding area, Clara immediately noticed she was surrounded by a sea of well-dressed passengers, many of whom shot her curious looks. She was no stranger to these silent judgments, the subtle expressions of disapproval that came with the territory. But over the years, she had learned to ignore the whispers and carry herself with dignity. She focused on the ticket in her hand, determined not to let their stares bother her. Row 2A. Clara smiled, quietly impressed by how close she was to the front of the plane. When her boarding group was called, she moved forward with a calm, measured step, her movements in stark contrast to the hurried pace of others around her. At the gate, she approached the flight attendant with a warm smile. Handing over her ticket, the attendant scanned it, paused for a moment, and then managed a tight-lipped smile. "Enjoy your flight, ma'am," she said, though her words felt a bit forced. Clara shook off her nerves and made her way down the jet bridge, her heart racing with excitement. The plane shone brightly under the airport lights, its modern interior featuring plush seats and smooth, shiny finishes. Clara couldn't help but feel a sense of wonder, mixing gratitude with a touch of disbelief at the luxury around her. After a lifetime of hard work, always putting others first, this was the first time Clara was letting herself enjoy something just for her. As she approached her seat, 2A, she paused, taking in the spaciousness of the cabin. The window seat seemed like a little slice of heaven, and Clara set her purse gently on the floor. But before she could hoist her small carry-on into the overhead bin, a sharp voice cut through her thoughts. "Excuse me, ma'am," said Lauren Mills, the lead flight attendant, her tone crisp and no nonsense. Clara turned to find a tall woman in her late 30s, impeccably dressed in the airline's uniform. Lauren's face was unreadable, professional, but with an edge of annoyance. "Is this your seat?" Lauren asked, looking at Clara like she didn't quite belong. "Yes, it is," Clara replied politely, holding up her boarding pass. Lauren leaned in to take a closer look, her gaze sharpening just a bit before she gave a brief nod. "All right," she said, her voice flat. "Please store your bag quickly so we can keep things moving." Clara reached for the overhead bin, but her motions were slower compared to the younger passengers around her. Her hands trembled just a little, not from weakness, but from the nervousness that came with being in an unfamiliar setting. Lauren folded her arms and let out a loud, exaggerated sigh, catching the attention of people nearby. "Do you need help?" she asked, though her tone made it clear she'd rather not assist. Before Clara could answer, a man sitting nearby stood up, offering a warm smile as he took the bag from her hands. "I've got it, ma'am," he said kindly, placing it in the compartment with ease. Clara smiled back gratefully and thanked him, her appreciation sincere. But Lauren's face darkened with irritation. "Let's not drag this out," Lauren said sharply, stepping aside to let Clara pass. As Clara sat down, she noticed the mixed reactions from the other passengers. Some glanced at her with curiosity. Others showed no interest, but a few clearly seemed uncomfortable with her presence. Clara kept her focus straight ahead, her hands gently resting on her lap. Over the years, she'd learned not to let the judgment of others shake her confidence. But Lauren wasn't making it easy, clearly trying to make Clara feel unwelcome. Lauren paced the aisle, her eyes flicking toward Clara now and then, her face unreadable, though anything but warm. Clara tried to block out the negativity and instead thought of the happiness waiting for her at the other end of the journey, the excitement of seeing her great-grandkids, their laughter filling the room, the stories she'd share about her own life. Still, Lauren's cold attitude and the disapproving glances from some of the other passengers lingered in her mind. Clara had dealt with discrimination more times than she could count, but every experience still left its mark. What no one realized, however, was that this seemingly quiet, elderly woman had a strength far beyond anyone's expectations. Without anyone noticing, Mrs. Clara Turner's presence on this flight would soon spark a series of events that would forever change the airline. While the flight attendants rushed around preparing for takeoff, Lauren's eyes were fixed on Clara. From the second the elderly woman stepped onto the plane, Lauren's attitude was icy, almost dismissive. It wasn't just the sharp tone of her voice or the way she deliberately avoided making eye contact. It was the sense of superiority Lauren radiated, as though Clara was nothing more than an inconvenience in her otherwise perfect world. As passengers settled into their seats, Clara quietly pressed the call button for assistance. She had noticed her seatbelt wasn't fastening correctly and wanted to make sure she was following the proper safety procedures. Lauren's heels echoed down the aisle as she approached, coming to an abrupt halt in front of Clara's seat. "What now?" she asked, her voice laced with annoyance. Clara, maintaining her composed demeanor, smiled warmly in response. "I'm sorry to bother you, but could I please have a small cup of water to take my medicine?" Lauren sighed dramatically, her voice thick with impatience. "We're not even in the air yet. Ma'am, water service doesn't begin until we reach cruising altitude. You'll have to wait." Clara tried to explain, her tone gentle. "It's just for my medicine. I promise I won't take up any more of your time." Lauren shot her a look, rolling her eyes as she huffed, "Fine," and stomped off toward the galley. Moments later, Lauren returned and roughly placed a small plastic cup of water on Clara's tray table, not saying a word. A few passengers nearby exchanged glances, some clearly disapproving, but Clara remained calm and gracious. She softly thanked Lauren, took her medicine, and settled back into her seat. Despite her calm demeanor, the uncomfortable tension in the air was palpable. A few moments later, Lauren returned to Clara's row, this time with a colleague in tow, standing over Clara with a confident stance. She crossed her arms and spoke loudly, catching the attention of nearby passengers. "Excuse me, ma'am," Lauren said, her tone firm. "Are you sure you're in the right seat? This area is for premium passengers only." Clara looked up, a bit puzzled but remained composed. "Yes, I'm in the right seat," she replied calmly. "My ticket says 2A, she added, showing Lauren her boarding pass. Lauren grabbed the ticket from Clara's hand and scrutinized it for a moment, her expression tight with focus. After a pause, she handed it back and said, "It seems you're in the right seat. But next time, please make sure you're boarding with the right group. It's important to follow the proper procedures." Clara blinked, unsure why Lauren felt the need to lecture her. "I did board with my assigned group," she replied softly. Lauren didn't acknowledge Clara's comment. Instead, she whispered something to her colleague before turning and walking away. Clara caught bits and pieces of the conversation, "doesn't belong," slowing things down, and her stomach dropped. She had dealt with discrimination plenty of times before, but it never got any easier. The tipping point came when Lauren showed up again, this time speaking to Clara as if she were a child. "Ma'am, you're going to need to keep your handbag under the seat in front of you at all times," Lauren said, Clara, who had already placed her bag securely under the seat, looked at Lauren, puzzled. "It's already under the seat, dear," Clara replied. Lauren glanced down, realizing her mistake, but instead of owning up to it, she simply said, "Well, just make sure it stays there. I'll be checking." Clara could feel the eyes of the other passengers on her as Lauren's condescending tone caught their attention. A young woman sitting across the aisle leaned over and whispered, "Don't worry about her, ma'am. She's been like this since we got on. You're not doing anything wrong." Clara flashed the young woman a grateful smile, though she couldn't shake the weight of Lauren's obvious hostility. It was apparent to Clara, and to anyone paying attention, that Lauren had deliberately chosen to treat her with a level of disdain that felt both unwarranted and hurtful. As the plane began its taxi for takeoff, Clara took a deep breath and closed her eyes, making a silent vow not to let Lauren's behavior spoil her trip. She reminded herself why she was on this flight in the first place, to visit her great-grandchildren. They were the light of her life, her greatest source of pride, and they were absolutely worth enduring any minor discomfort. But little did Clara know, Lauren's attitude was just getting started.